All right, let's do a little poll. First, for the women, a question for the women. How many of you have been in this situation, by a show of hands? You're in a meeting, and it's predominantly men. You're one of the only or a few women, and you offer something to the meeting. You say a suggestion or an idea or a proposal, and it's basically ignored. And then a man, a few minutes later, says the same thing you just said, and everybody acts like it's the greatest thing they've ever heard. Show of hands of the women who have experienced that? Okay. I'm curious, men, how many of the men have witnessed that? Okay, so there's fewer men that witnessed it than women that experienced it, which I think might say something about what the men are seeing also. So let's pay attention to that. Did you notice that it happened in our story today? Did you notice that Elizabeth said very clearly what was a correct answer, and people argued with her and said, no, let's ask the man. As a little context for this, think about it. We'll put it in the context of the story. So the Gospel of Luke begins with the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah. Zechariah is serving in the temple. He's in the temple alone, and he has a vision of this angel, Angel Gabriel, the same angel that appeared to Mary in the Gospel of Luke. So Angel Gabriel's making the rounds, telling people they're going to be pregnant. And the angel Gabriel says, your wife Elizabeth is going to be pregnant, even though she is past childbearing age. So it would be normally impossible, but she's going to become pregnant. And Zechariah's like, well, actually, I'd like to argue with you about that. I don't think that that's really possible. And the angel gets very mad, and he's like, I am Gabriel. How dare you argue with me, right? And curses Zechariah with being unable to speak for the entire length of Elizabeth's pregnancy. So he leaves the temple. Elizabeth gets pregnant, just like it was suggested. And we're now fast forwarding to the day when the baby has been born and is going to be circumcised and named. It's the naming ceremony and the circumcision ceremony. And for some reason, like, everybody's there discussing the name. Like the neighbors and the relatives are all packed into this house. And I don't know, why isn't it up to Elizabeth and Zechariah on what to name the baby? But apparently it's a community decision, because they're all kind of debating what the name of this baby should be. And they're kind of leaning towards Zechariah, to name the baby after the father. And Elizabeth is sitting there, and she knows that that's not right, that the name of the baby has to be John, that's what the angel told Zechariah. And so she does something very brave, which is, when a conversation is clearly going in a certain direction that makes us uncomfortable, that we don't agree with, do we have the courage to step up and say that they're wrong, all by ourselves? And that's what she does, and she does it in two ways. She does it by using a very holy word. The word is no, right? So she might not have fully articulated an argument against what's happening or everything she wants to say, but she knows enough that when it's going in a certain direction, and it looks like everybody's going to say the baby's going to be Zechariah, she just calls out, no. And when we are in such conversations where we are becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the way it's going, maybe there's racism, maybe there's sexism, maybe there's homophobia, maybe it's anti-immigrant, all the ways that we might be uncomfortable with the way a conversation is going, even if we aren't able to fully articulate why we disagree with what's happening, we can say no. And that will stop a conversation cold. And it takes courage. But to just say, I don't know exactly what I want to say, but no. And that gives her then a moment to say what she does want to say, which isn't, again, a full-blown argument for why it should be this way. She just simply speaks her truth. His name is John. That's all she has to say. She doesn't have to explain why or justify herself. That's all she's able to say. That's all she can say in that moment, and that's what she says. No. His name is John. And predictably, everybody's like, oh, that's silly. What a silly woman to suggest the name be John. What a silly name. We're not going to pay any attention to her. Let's ask her husband. Let's ask the man. So they turn to the man. And I think Zechariah really misses an opportunity here. I mean, I've been married a long time. And if there's an opportunity to say, my wife is right, you should take it. Especially because maybe back home you argue quite a bit with her about whether she's right or not, or you're right, and you have a debt to pay. And so if you can publicly say a very simple, yeah, she's right, what she said is correct, you should take it. Zechariah fails. And he even has a chance to write it down, so he has a chance to think about it. He's like texting his answer, so he has a chance to edit what he wants to say. And instead of just writing, my wife is right, or listen to Elizabeth, or everybody get out of my house, he says, well, I'm glad you asked. I do have some opinions on this topic. His name is John. He's the first person to ever say it. And everybody's like, oh, John, what an amazing name. I can't believe anybody ever suggested the name John. That's beautiful. So that's the story. And I wonder why Luke put it here. I wonder why the Gospel of Luke puts a story about a woman who is silenced here, especially Elizabeth, who's taken a primary role in this story up to this point. For her story to end in the Gospel of Luke with everybody just dismissing her seems unfair and unjust, especially since Luke is really not that bad when it comes to his portrayal of women. Of the Gospels, I mean, he's not great, but he's not the worst either. So in the Gospel of Luke, we have the story of Mary and Elizabeth starting the whole Gospel. We have a story which passes the Bechdel test. You know, the Bechdel test in a movie or a book is, are there two women who talk to each other about something other than a man? That's the Bechdel test. And that happens when Mary and Elizabeth get together for the first time and start plotting the overthrow of the Roman Empire together, right? So it passes the Bechdel test, and then there are a number of stories about women in the Gospel of Luke. There's the woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. She's hemorrhaging, she's menstruating for 12 years, uncontrollably. She's outcast in her community. And Luke tells a story of how she boldly and courageously pushes her way through a crowd of people, making them all unclean in the process because she's decided she's going to take control of her narrative and get her healing. And she reaches through this crowd and touches Jesus, and Jesus turns to her and says, "Woman, your faith has made you well." Luke tells the story of the woman who gets an unjust judgment from a corrupt judge. And she responds to that by standing outside the judge's house day and night, demanding that he change his judgment until he finally relents because she is so persistent. The Gospel of Luke has the woman who lost a coin being compared to God. And so the woman loses a coin, and then she turns her house upside down until she finds the coin, and then she uses it to throw a whole party for the neighborhood. The Gospel of Luke names the women who accompanied Jesus. The Gospel of Luke compares Jesus to a mother hen. Jesus says, "I wish I was like a mother hen who could take all of you under my wings." The Gospel of Luke has the widow's mite, or the widow's offering, where the little bit that the old woman gives is considered more than any of the male priests have given so far. And the Gospel of Luke has the women at the tomb. The first ones at the tomb, the first ones to see the risen Jesus, and the first ones to proclaim the risen Jesus to the world. So why in this story, this gospel that really portrays women in a positive light, does Luke tell us a story at the beginning of a woman who is completely silenced and disregarded? And I have two suggestions. One is that she is being lifted up as an example for the courage that it took her to say, "No, his name is John." And that we are called to follow that example when we are in conversations where we feel like we're in the minority, but we need to speak out for what's right. And we say, "No, this is my truth, and I need to say it." Another possibility is we are being invited to be allies in this conversation. That we are when we see in a gospel that so centers the marginalized, somebody who is being silenced because of who they are, that we are being invited to think about how we can be advocates or allies for somebody whose voice is being silenced. And I thought about what are some examples of ways we could do that? And so I asked ChatGPT, I said, If you're in a meeting and a woman offers an idea and it's dismissed, only to have a man offer the same idea and it be praised and accepted, what is a good way to advocate for the woman? That's what I put into ChatGPT. And it gave me this list of things that you could say, all these different ways you could respond. So I took that list and I changed it around a little bit so that it would match what we would say if we were present when Elizabeth was silenced, if we were in that room. So here's some options. I think it's so great that Zechariah agrees with Elizabeth about the name. Wait, did you say John? I heard Elizabeth say that a minute ago. It's great that you're supporting her. John is a good name, but I just want to make sure Elizabeth gets credit for suggesting it first. A little more confrontational. Great, Zechariah and Elizabeth, you agree with each other. Now, Elizabeth, can you tell us why you chose the name John? Or this one. Hey, everybody, I noticed when Elizabeth told us the name, we argued with her. But when Zechariah said the same name, we immediately accepted it. Why do we think that is? Let's discuss. So it may be that that's what we're called to do. But I want to close with just wondering, you might think, well, this is kind of a random topic to be talking about on the Sunday before Christmas. Why are we talking about what to do in a meeting if a woman's word is dismissed? But really, that's what the Christmas story is all about. The Christmas story is about what happens when God speaks amongst the marginalized. The Christmas story is about where do we hear God speaking in the world. And it's not among the powerful, and it's not in all the places that we might expect. So in the Christmas story, God speaks from a working class family that is having to travel while the wife is pregnant because the emperor has made an unreasonable demand to travel to your hometown for a census. We have a story in the Christmas story of this unwed teenage mother who is bringing God into the world. We have a story in the Christmas story of them going to somebody's home, probably not into an inn or a motel, but somebody's home, and there was no room for them, so they had to sleep with the animals. And that God came into the world amongst the animals. And that God was laid in the manger, the feeding trough of the animals. So we're invited over and over in the Christmas story to notice that God is speaking in this world, not through the powerful people that we might expect, but through those whose voices are usually silenced and dismissed. Jesus, throughout his ministry, points us in that direction. Jesus, in his death, enters into solidarity with all those who are unjustly convicted and who are harmed by the state. So throughout the Gospel of Luke, the Christmas story is very clear. When we listen for God, we don't listen up, we listen down as much as possible. We listen to those voices that are being pushed down. And we can do that by just having a certain attitude in every conversation we enter into. Who are we listening to? And maybe we have some biases within us that we are constantly listening to the men more than the women, or white people more than people of color, or straight people more than LGBTQ people. And we got to pay attention to that. It takes a certain amount of self-awareness to really be thoughtful about who we are listening to in the room. But then to always, when we are able, to lift up those voices, to support those voices, defend and amplify those voices that are being dismissed. And maybe then also to do that, and then the other side of that coin is to take our example from Elizabeth. And when we find ourselves in situations that are going to take a certain amount of courage, where we have to speak up in an unpopular opinion because the conversation's going away that's wrong, we use the holy word of no, and then we speak our truth. And that's what Christmas is all about. Amen.